What an amazing program. Thank you, Anna, and all those who have been helping with you. It's, a real blessing as we think back of the time when Jesus come to be King. And today I want to focus our message on the fact that how he came as a king, as a baby, and then how he pronounced his kingship by riding in on a donkey. But I also want us to think about Jesus' first coming and see some similarities between his second coming and the warning message that Jesus came, that he wants us to be ready. And this is probably one of the last times that I will be here, and I want us to think about being ready for when Jesus comes again. Because there was a group of people that came the first time who were not ready, who should have been ready. And we're going to have a look at that story. But first of all, I'd like to share a little story of my trip to the Bible Lands. And it was very special going and seeing the place, the most likely place where Jesus would have been born. And I'll show you some pictures of that as well. But first of all, on our trip, we went to a place called Amman in Jordan. And in this area, we went into our motel, we saw a couple of things, and then the next day we went to this area here. And we hopped off the bus, but before we hopped off the bus, we were reminded of something that our tour guide mentioned the day beforehand. And what our tour guide mentioned, that he has this policy that he had implemented, which was a bit of fun, but it also made sure that people stuck to the times and met back at the right time, at the right place. And so what he actually implemented was that if you were late, anyone that was late of the time, the designated time, would have to buy ice creams for everyone on the bus. And we thought, well, this is pretty good, but this is going to make sure that no one is late. And he said it works very well, and that was all fine. So we stopped in Amman the next day in this place, and he said, I want you to look over there, and as you look over there, you can see that there's a place with a veranda. And he said, this is a really good place to eat. But you've got a bit of time. We're not meeting back here until 2 o'clock. So I'm going to take some people and we'll go up the street, and there's some other places to eat as well, and you can decide where you're going to eat. So the group sort of split off, and we decided that we were going to eat first, because if we ate first, we had no idea how long the food was going to take, and then when we got finished our food, we could use the rest of the time to go up the street and see what was in the shops and other things around. And so we went up into this place where up on the right-hand picture, you actually look down over the town, and in the bottom picture on the right-hand side, you can see the place where we to meet. You could actually see it from this restaurant. And so we ate and spent some time there, and we had some beautiful food. And just as we were about to leave, there was a group with the leader in it that had come to this place after taking the others up and back, and he came to eat. There was only one problem. The restaurant by this time was extremely busy, and the waiting time on the food was a bit of an in question mark. But we went out and we went shopping, and we had a look at the different areas and looked over the town. And I'm very much a time person. Time is really important to me, and I wasn't going to be caught buying ice creams. And so probably annoyed my wife a little, because she enjoyed sort of shopping, and who cares about that? If we've got to spend a little bit of money buying ice creams, that's okay. But I wasn't sure about how much it was going to cost, and so I kept saying, we better head back. We better head back. And finally they agreed, and we headed back to this place that we see in this picture, because we were meeting here in this square, in this courtyard. And we got there was a few others that came, and a few more came, and 1 minute to 2, and there's still a group of about 8 missing, with the leader of the group, who made the law. made that decree. And anyway, as we're waiting, we're looking, and the time went, and he'd made a policy that, yes, it was 2 o'clock, but there was going to be a period of grace. So 2 o'clock came, 1 minute past 2, 2 minutes past 2, and finally the clock clicked over 2:03. And he still wasn't there. Well, it wasn't until about 10 minutes later that he turned up with his group. And the rest of the group that was there, we had a lot of joy in saying, we're really keen for these ice creams. Because in this rule that he'd made, you could choose any ice cream you wanted. So the next day we were going to get ice creams, but we couldn't get them in the place that he wanted to get them. And then we finally went to the other place, and it was probably the dearest place on our whole trip to buy ice creams. The guy would have spent about $150 on ice creams. And because he led the group, he felt responsible and he paid for the ice creams. But I want us to think about that story in relation to distractions and being ready to see Jesus. So let's open our Bibles. We've heard the story told and played out, and it was very beautiful the way it was done. In Matthew chapter 2, I want to focus on a number of things. Matthew chapter 2, and we're going to look at verse 1 to 3. Matthew chapter 2. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. This is a period where we've had about 400 years of not hearing from any prophetic writings. This is a period where the Jewish leaders actually became very political, and some of their positions were chosen in that respect by how much money or the status that you actually had, and the leaders of the church had sort of gone away from Christ. And we find that it was at that time that Jesus was to be born in Bethlehem, and in the days of Herod the king. Verse 2 says that when they came to Jerusalem, they said, "Where is he who is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship." This is a very interesting contrast. Herod is the current king, but they had come to see the person who was born to be king. Herod wasn't born to be king. Herod got his rulership through the deceptive means and through paying off the right people, and Herod was king through deception. But here we have one being born the king. We're going to look at 3 places where Jesus is pronounced as king. But here we find this contrast between one who is currently classed as the king and one who is born the king. And then in verse 3 it says, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and sadly all Jerusalem with him. Did you notice that? All Jerusalem were troubled. Why should they be troubled? This was the most exciting time in Earth's history, when God, through Jesus, visits this earth. And they're troubled. The interesting thing that the wise men, they had seen the signs, they'd seen the star, they knew the prophecy of Balaam, and they followed that star. They had been watching the signs, and they had come to worship. While the people in Jerusalem who should have known were troubled. And what's really even more interesting is that when, in verse 4, and when they had gathered all the chief priests and the scribes of the people together, inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written of the prophet, behold, you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So the interesting thing is that the leaders also knew about the signs. And when Herod asked the leaders where was he to be born, they immediately quoted scripture. They said, we know where he is to be born. And you would think to yourself, well, they would go and look, wouldn't they? No record of them going to look for Jesus. And when Jesus came in, they rejected their Messiah. They missed the Messiah because they were so full of themselves. They were so full of what was happening all around them at the time that they missed Jesus. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go search carefully for the young child, and when they found him, bring back word to us. So this was the king showing more interest than the Jewish people in this Jesus who was born king. Sadly, he was more interested because it was a threat to his rulership, and he wanted to make sure that he got rid of this Jesus. But they missed him. They missed him. One of the highlights of my trip was when we went to this place in Bethlehem where we saw the church. There's a church built over the site now, and they have a habit of doing that. And what really astounds me is more the fact that they take money from people that come from all over the world to see the sites of where Jesus was born. They open up these sites and you can go and see them today. And in the left here we have the picture of the church that is over the most holy site of where the birth of Jesus was. The interesting thing is that the Bible tells us that he was born in a manger. Well, he was born where the animals were, and it probably wasn't like this, but it was actually more like a cave where Jesus was born, because the animals would be brought into cave areas where they could be sheltered. And so we had to duck down in under this area, and see my wife there ducking down in underneath, and then we would enter the church, and then from the church we would go down a number of stairs to get down to the very bottom, where we would see these cave areas where it was most likely that Jesus was born. And this is very moving for me as I stood in this place and thought about Jesus as a king being born as a baby. Then we went off to another site where the shepherds would have had the revelation by the angels of Jesus' birth. And the first thing when we hopped off the bus, we saw this boy here with a lamb, and he was wanting to get pictures where we could earn some money off tourists like myself. But when we went to that area, we went to an area where there was a cave where they most likely kept the sheep and the flocks safe at night time. But there was also a church there, and in that church was these little dome areas over it, and on the ceiling were these amazing artist pictations of the scene that would have taken place in that area. So we find that only a small amount of people were ready to see Jesus when he came. The wise men, the shepherds, and they saw the king born. They noticed the signs that were happening, and they were the ones that came to worship. But Jerusalem were troubled, and they missed their Messiah. So the next time we find Jesus being pronounced as a king was in Matthew 21 and verse 5. And it says there in Matthew 21 and verse 5, tell the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, lowly and sitting on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. Now this was a way that a king would come in to a kingship. They ride in on a horse down into Jerusalem and be pronounced as king. But notice that he is riding on a donkey, on the colt of a king. He's coming lowly, humbly, and he came to die for you and for me. Is this how kings were presented? This is completely different to how kings are presented. The next time we hear about Jesus being the king was when the governor, Pilate, in Matthew 27 and verse 11 said, "And the governor asked him, saying, 'Are you the king of the Jews?' And Jesus said to him, 'It is as you say.'" In verse 37, in verse 34 it says, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the earth.'" So we find the next time we hear about Jesus being king, he is the judge. And he's separating those who want to be a part of his kingdom with those who don't want to be a part of his kingdom. And then the last time Matthew records is that they put over his head the accusation written against him, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." This is Jesus, King of the Jews. Here he was displayed, hanging on a cross. John records this as the most glorious event, but to others who are unaware, this was the most humiliating way a person could die. That this revealed what this king was like. He was not about himself, he was about you and I here today. But Revelation tells us that this king is coming again, but this time he's going to be riding something different. This king will be riding a white horse. But first of all, we find in Matthew 24, and I don't know if we haven't handed out our notes. Have we handed out our notes? Yes, we've all got our notes. We're not going to go through those notes today, but that is an extensive view of Matthew 24 and 25. Not so much on 24 and 25, but this is in relation to the question that Jesus' disciples asked Jesus when he left the temple for the last time. When he left the temple for the last time, he was sitting over on the other side of the Kidron Valley, looking back at the Temple Mount. And this is the picture that I took, sitting on the other side where the disciples and Jesus would have been. And you can see the Muslim mosque there in this picture, but it's where the temple would have been. And Jesus was down and depressed, and the disciples tried to lift him up, saying, "Look at the beautiful temple." And Jesus says that all this is going to be destroyed. And then the disciples ask the question, "When will these things be? Also, what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" So Jesus goes through and he reveals some signs. And then, after he revealed some signs, he revealed a time of tribulation, and then he reveals how he's going to come. But after that, and this is the part that I want us to look at this morning, in Matthew 24, turn over with me if you like. Matthew 24 and verse 42. After Jesus told everyone what it would be like, and how two would be grinding the mill, one will be taken, one will be left, helping us to realise that there is two decisions that we make which we will face. The ones that are taken to their destructions, and the ones that are left are ones left to meet the Lord. And in verse 42 it tells us, "Watch therefore, for you do not know at what hour your Lord is coming." A lot of the other signs related to know when we would know that it is near. But the instruction that Jesus left with his disciples is to watch. To watch. This word watch is an interesting word, because this word watch comes from the Greek word is to not just sit and watch. It actually means to be active, to give strict attention to be cautious through inaction. Some calamity might come against you. So Jesus uses the analogy of a thief in the night. "Do not know," he says in verse 40, "but know this, that if your master of the house had known what the hour of the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. You know, I remember a time that we were broken into in Wardell Road in Alstonville. We were out on a property and we'd become very complacent, thinking no one breaks into places outside the town there. But we woke up this morning and we were getting ready to go somewhere, and we were missing a couple of items that we thought we left in the kitchen there, and we couldn't find them. And so we're searching the house, and then all of a sudden we saw the curtain blowing out the window the wrong way, and thinking, how can that happen? As we had a closer inspection, we saw that the louvers had been taken out of the window, the screen was off, and someone had actually broken in through the night. We were not ready, we were not prepared, because that didn't happen. So we missed that opportunity. And Jesus uses the analogy of a thief in the night to tell us the seriousness of not watching. And so we see some similarities between the second coming of Jesus and the first coming. In the second coming, it says, you know, the signs are shown to us. The warning is given to watch, to be ready. And in Revelation chapter 1 and verse 7, it tells us that every eye will see him and all the people of the earth will mourn because of him. So just as people were troubled in Jesus' time, we find that there's a mourning happening because they missed the second coming of Jesus. But let's go over to Revelation chapter 19. Revelation chapter 19. Revelation chapter 19. And verse 11. Now I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse. And he who sat on him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. This is really interesting because this is very different to the way he entered the world. When he entered the world, he entered as a baby. When he was pronounced as king coming into Jerusalem for the last time, he was riding the colt of a donkey. But now we find he's riding a white horse. He's riding a white horse because a white horse represents that the victory is over, the battle has been won, the time for peace has now arrived. There would be watchers on the wall when the Israelites went out to battle, and if they saw their king coming first with an army of people after, also riding on horses, but if the king was riding a white horse, it meant that they had won the battle. And there was cheers that rang out through Jerusalem as the king rode back on a white horse, and now Jesus is depicted in this second coming as riding a white horse. Very different to what we saw beforehand. And in verse 16 it says, he has on his robe and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So we see the parallels between Jesus' first coming and Jesus' second coming. In the first coming, he came as a humble servant to serve and to give his life for us. We find that there were signs of that. We will find that they should have been watching, but we find that they weren't ready to accept Jesus as their Saviour. There are signs all around us today. And I see people who know about these signs, who know about the near coming and the soon coming of Jesus, and they're walking away from spending time with God. And my prayer is that they will wake up. They will wake up and start watching, because Jesus' coming is near. And I pray that every single one of us here today will be different to the Jewish leaders, that we will watch, we will be attentive, we will do what Matthew 25 tells us to do, to be filled with the Spirit, to use our talents to help the poor, to be ready for when Jesus comes, because he is coming soon. And I want us each to be ready for that day. I'm not sure if I'm meant to close in prayer. Where's Anna? Or there's some more things yet? You're going to sing first. Thanks.